Hi there, and welcome to another episode of a podcast from We Talk Science. Thank you very much for joining us today. I have Mikel Delgado on the phone with me. She's going to tell us a lot about cat behavior today. Hi, Mikel. It's really nice to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me all about yourself. What have you studied? Why are you so passionate about cat behavior or behavior of animals in general? Let's hear your story.
Sure. Well, I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis. And before that, I got my PhD at UC Berkeley. I was studying squirrel behavior for my dissertation, which was an adventure. And, before that, I kind of had a long, circuitous route, I guess, to academia because I was a college dropout who moved to California. And what I really wanted to do was just be in a rock band. And I mean, I always loved cats, so it makes complete sense to me that I ended up where I am. But I did not really think of working with animals as a career until I started volunteering at an animal shelter almost 20 years ago. And I ended up working there as a full-time employment and decided, about 8 years in that I wanted to study animal behavior more formally. And the time I was at the shelter, definitely it's a great opportunity to observe a lot of animals under stressful conditions and all different kinds of animal personalities. And so I knew, okay, I want to do something different with what I'm learning here. And so that was what sparked my interest in going back to school, finishing a bachelor's degree. And then I got really into research when I was an undergrad and decided to apply to grad school. And at the time, it was pretty hard to find programs where I could study cats. And so I was mostly just looking for places that I could broadly study animal behavior and cognition, learn new skills, learn more about doing research. And that whole time I was working with cats as well. So I worked with cats at the shelter, and then I started a consulting business. So I also work with cat owners in their homes to help them solve behavior problems. And so those kinds of experiences have really shaped my interest in ending up where I am now, which is doing more applied research, trying to improve the welfare, health, and outcomes for domestic cats living with people.
That's really interesting. So, as a person who knows almost nothing about behavior and cognition, what is the basic? So, for a person like me who doesn't know anything about it, how would you explain the whole idea of animal cognition to a person?
Sure. I mean, I think really at the most basic level, it is about how animals experience the world, right? And, we're animals too. So we have to remember there's not like this hard line between us and other animals. Cognition evolved just like our physical bodies evolved. And so I think of it really as how animals take in information about their environment and use that information to behave, to make decisions, to act. And I think one of the questions that I often get asked about animal cognition is like, is this animal smarter than this other animal? So are cats smarter than dogs? And, I studied squirrels, so people always want to know, like, how smart are squirrels? And I really found that question to be flawed because every animal has evolved to solve particular problems. So for squirrels, their most important problem was really about storing food and being able to retrieve as much of it later as possible. So I was studying their food storing behavior and the cognitive strategies that they use to basically retrieve those caches months later. And for cats, their main problem to solve is really all about hunting. And what's interesting is that as we've brought cats in to live with us in homes, we have taken away some of those opportunities to exhibit natural behaviors, namely predating or engaging in play that resembles predation. And so really that lack of stimulation can really start a lot of behavior issues. So, I think cognition can tie into, like I said, applied science and really like what are the outcomes for those animals. But yeah, at the most basic level, I'd say it's really about interacting with your environment, making decisions, and surviving.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense, obviously. So my next question is essentially, as pets got domesticated over evolutionary sort of over the years, as humans started changing the behavior as well. I'm sure that this must have had quite a bit of impact on the behavior of animals as well, right? So you have the wild animals and you have the domesticated animals. How do you see a difference there, a clear difference between the cognition or the abilities? Have these animals lost certain abilities, for example, over the years as they have been domesticated?
Yeah, I mean, certain aspects of domestication select for behaviors that, probably reduce competition. And so we know that, for example, a lot of domestic animals have smaller brains than their wild ancestors. We also select for more juvenile behaviors, especially thinking about animals we've domesticated more for pets than, say, food. So we like certain facial appearances. Certainly in dogs, we've selected them for facial expressions like smiling and raised eyebrows. The thing that is a little bit different about cats is that we did not domesticate them for a specific purpose, right? So we didn't say, oh, we need you to help us protect our property or to help us hunt. People think like, oh, well, cats, did present a benefit to humans because they would hunt rodents. And we know that when humans started storing grains, that attracted rodents, and then cats came along and took care of the rodent problem. But cats were not the only hunters of rodents. So it wasn't necessarily like a one-way street as far as the benefits of the relationship. If anything, it benefited the cats more than it benefited the humans, because the cats could take advantage of this large surplus of mice. And like I said, we already had other species like weasels and dogs that were efficient rodent hunters. So, and I think the other thing to keep in mind, and, of course, I'm a little biased because I love cats and I study cats, so I do, tend to think of them as a little different, but the domestication process for cats has been shorter. It's been a little different as far as what we've selected them from. And a lot of us who study cats consider it somewhat incomplete in that a lot of the wild, or quote unquote wild or ancestral behaviors have been retained. We have not imposed a lot on cat genetics. So even though, of course, now there's about 40 cat breeds that are recognized and people, are breeding more cats compared to dogs, it's much less. We've imposed fewer genetic changes on them, and a smaller percentage of cats are bred compared to dogs. So there was a study that came out maybe about 5 years ago on cat genetics, and it suggested that about 96% of cats are still choosing their own mates. So we're really only engaging in selective breeding on a pretty small number of cats that end up in homes. So most of us who have cats, have a cat who has not been selected for particular appearances or even behavior. And that's another difference for cat domestication compared to, say, dog domestication, is that most of our selection has been for appearance and not really for behavioral traits. Like with dogs, you're selecting for ability to point or ability to track prey. And with cats, it's really like, okay, we like this look, so we're going to breed this look into more cats or make it more extreme. So we haven't really said, okay, we want a cat that has these really specific personality traits, not to any, I'd say, extent that we would say we can definitely breed cats with those traits with any kind of fidelity.
Okay, that's interesting. So here's maybe a question which is a little naive, but if dogs were selected for their usefulness in terms of, hunting and, in order to point and, that they're actually, incredibly cute as well, as you mentioned, has a timeline has something to do with it? Because, is it possible that the reason why cats have not been, bred into domestic, being a domestic sort of animal, that it was actually bred, it was actually selected as a pet much later than dogs? Is there a comparison there at all?
Oh yeah, that's definitely part of it. And if we fast forward, assuming we can fast forward another 5,000 years, I'm sure that relationship with cats would look quite a bit different. We do have, say, the potential to breed cats that have less predatory behavior, might be more sedentary. Is that something that most cat owners would want? It's unclear. Like, a lot of us appreciate maybe some of those kind of wild traits in our cats, but also a lot of people have behavior problems with their cats, and whether or not we should be trying to solve those problems through environmental changes, or we should be trying to breed out those problems, I'm not sure. Do we want to breed a cat that is happier being confined in a less stimulating environment, or do we want to make the environment more stimulating? But yeah, I envision that, if we were to have the additional time that people have had for dog domestication, for cat domestication, that cats would be quite a bit different.
That's really interesting, because we've all read, and I'm sure that I have read something about the fact that dogs have been domesticated, but cats have domesticated humans actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so tell us about what you do specifically in your postdoc.
Yeah, so I have a couple of different projects that I'm doing at UC Davis, and probably the most all-encompassing one has been working specifically with neonatal kittens and looking at the effects of being orphaned on these kittens. And so here in the United States, there are quite a few kittens each year that get separated from their moms accidentally. And it could be mom gets hit by a car, or mom gives birth in a place and then it turns out that there's a lot of people there and she leaves. I think there's a lot of good Samaritans that maybe find kittens and mom's off hunting and they don't realize it. And so they save the kittens, but it turns out that if they'd waited, mom would have come back and cared for the kittens. And so a lot of these kittens end up in animal shelters. They're very difficult to care for when they're young because they need round-the-clock feeding. So like every 2 to 3 hours when they're just a week or two old, they need to be bottle fed. And so these kittens are at high risk of euthanasia. But we also know that a lot of rescue groups are increasing their chance of survival by having specialized foster programs that take in these kittens. So knowing that there's a lot of these kittens around, there's in fact a student group at UC Davis called the Orphan Kitten Project that specializes in taking in these kittens from the community, fostering them, and then adopting them out. We wanted to take a closer look at how being orphaned impacts their health and behavior, and not with the intention of saying like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this or that there's any problems, but you do hear a lot of anecdotes in the rescue community that kittens that are bottle fed or somehow have problematic behaviors like biting. And so, it's more like, okay, if there are potential health or behavior problems from being separated from your mom too early, we should know what they are, and then we should address how to help these kittens have the best chance of success. So that's really what we've been focused on. So we did a study looking at the telomere lengths of orphaned kittens versus mother-reared kittens. And so that's looking at a specific part of the DNA that is associated with cellular aging. It's also been associated with early life trauma and health problems, shorter lifespan. So we wanted to look at whether or not that part of our genetic material in kittens was shorter if they'd been orphaned than if they'd been mother-reared. And so, for example, in that study, we actually found no differences. We collected blood from kittens at 1 week of age and 8 weeks of age from orphans, and then from kittens who were with their moms, and we did not find any differences. So that's a good sign. So that tells us that as far as that one particular genetic marker, there were no detrimental effects that we observed from being orphaned. We did another study looking at stress responses in orphans versus mother-reared kittens. In that case, we did find that at 1 and 3 weeks of age, orphans showed more vocalizations and activity when they were separated from their nest compared to mother-reared kittens. So that's assumed to be vocalizations at that age are typically distress calls, and activities interpreted with the desire to try to relocate and orient home if you've been separated. And so kittens, of course, have a natural instinct if they've been separated from their family when they're that small and vulnerable to try to get back to them. And so the vocalizations would help mom find them, and activity would help them, would increase the chances that they'd get back to their nest. So those are some of the questions that we've been looking at in these kittens. We've also been doing some studies related to what's called cross-sucking behavior in orphaned kittens, and this is the sucking on the body parts of litter mates. So this is, a misdirected behavior intended for nursing on mom. And what happens is when these kittens don't have a mom, they end up sucking on each other's genitals. And it can be quite problematic both for the sucker, who will ingest urine and feces because they're stimulating their litter mates to go to the bathroom. That's exactly what mom would do. She would lick their genital area, which would cause them to eliminate, and that's how she keeps the nest clean. But when there's no mom around and your litter mates are sucking on your genitals, you go to the bathroom and they consume the urine and feces, and then they don't eat formula. And then the victim also often ends up with skin irritation. Male kittens are susceptible to getting injured on their penises due to the sucking behavior. So it can turn into quite a big problem. And when we were doing an unrelated study, we observed about 20% of the kittens engaged in this behavior. So it's a fairly significant number of kittens that do this. So we've been doing research to try to understand kind of what the behavior looks like, how foster caretakers are dealing with it, and kind of what the outcomes are. And right now we're just starting a study to look at whether or not we can prevent this behavior through a surrogate oral enrichment item, which is basically a stuffed mom cat with nipples. So
Interesting. That's really interesting. Do you actually follow these kittens, in time? So as they, from neonatal to as they grow older and older, and see what the differences are in behavior when they're orphaned?
So that's a fantastic question. That would be my ultimate goal. If I could get, a very big grant and be able to
Yeah.
stay at UC Davis, I would love to follow them into adulthood. So we've been able to do kind of birth to 2 months when they get adopted, but to actually maintain that relationship with the adopter does require a bit more infrastructure than we had, and probably money than we've had. So we've been able. So I should also clarify that all of the kittens in our studies are in foster homes. So we don't have a lab of kittens. We are working with the community. We're working with rescue groups, and so. Luckily, all the rescue groups that we've been working with and their foster caretakers have been really great and willing to, keep us updated on what's going on with these kittens until they get adopted. But yeah, the post-adoption experience would definitely require a lot of effort to maintain that relationship over time.
While I'm very, very happy that these kittens do get adopted, a lab full of kittens just sounds amazing to me.
I mean, it would be the cutest thing ever.
It would, absolutely.
Yeah, it's tough to do. I mean, maintaining animals in a lab is very expensive and challenging. So I'm perfectly happy to have them be in people's homes. But yeah, it would be cute.
The following question I have, of course, also is the fact that, you have these orphan kittens. Is their behavior different from if they have caretakers that are human, that are trying to essentially, make sure that they grow up and they are fed and all of this? What the differences would be in human reared kittens versus kittens that are actually with mom?
Right. And, anecdotally, I will say that we did we were kind of piloting a personality test on kittens, and we just tested on a few kittens to see if it was going to work. And the one thing I noticed is that the mother-reared kittens were, so we had them in a strange environment. They were separated from their mom and their litter mates, and this was at about 2 months of age. The orphaned kittens who had been hand-reared by people and bottle-fed were much more confident and interested in me, and the mother-reared kittens definitely seemed like, where's mom? And they seemed a little less sure. And people who do hand-raise kittens do report, they're very human-focused. And so it doesn't surprise me that we'd see some differences, but of course, we would also expect there's naturally personality differences between all cats, right? So there's going to be a spectrum from very bold and confident and human-focused to maybe more shy and reserved. And so I would expect that even some bottle babies would be, not your stereotype. And the same is true of purebred cats. Sometimes you'll hear like cats of a particular breed have this personality, and not every cat of that breed will have those personality traits.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, I would love to know long term if these cats do have, really noticeable differences in their personalities.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to know to basically for cat breeders as well, of course, and also rescue groups to make sure that the cats basically have the best life that they could have, in spite of the fact that they might have been separated from their mom very, very early on in their birth. Yeah.
Yes, and there may be some protective factors too, like having litter mates, right? So one of the things that people say about bottle babies is, especially if they're singletons, they don't have any litter mates as well, that they don't learn necessarily how to be a kitten the same way they would if they had litter mates. And so my feeling is that there's probably a lot of protective effects of having, another cat to live with, to play with, to kind of learn how to be a cat with.
Yeah. Really interesting. All right. So I'm looking at the list of, sort of articles and interviews that you've done with all the different cat questions that you've answered. And I'm sure that, I'll put this, of course, on my blog as well, the link to it. But I think one of the things that I want to know is, one of the things that I think every cat owner has in their mind is this: does my cat love me? But it's scratching me and hurting me. Why is it doing that? So I mean, what is the one biggest, I don't know, the biggest characteristics of a cat when a cat actually really loves being with you?
Yeah. So, I think, and I say this a lot, it's really important to recognize that your cat has wants and needs that may not match yours in the moment. And, a lot of us who love cats really want to hold them and cuddle them and touch them. And some cats really love being held and cuddled and touched all the time. But we know from research that cats really like being in control of an interaction with humans. So one study looked at basically they had people either go into a room and approach their cat or go into a room and let their cat approach them. And what the researchers found was that when the cats were in control of the interaction lasted longer and was more positive. So I always use this as kind of a preamble for how people should interact with their cats. And so sometimes maybe you don't have the best relationship with your cat because you are constantly trying to touch them and not give them kind of the control to say, I'm interested in hanging out with you. So when you want to, if you want to know if your cat loves you, I think every cat shows their love in a different way. And some cats, it would be sitting on your lap. Some cats, it might be sitting on the couch 2 feet away from you and like being around you all the time. And sometimes people don't recognize like, oh, he's always kind of hanging out in the same room with me. That's love. Whereas for other cats, their showing of love is by like rubbing all over you and like, wanting to be held or, purring in your face. So it really is a range of behaviors. And so we're looking at, kind of, does your cat seem happy in general? That is how they show love, by being happy. And so, can they lay in a relaxed place, where they seem comfortable, they're not tense, they're not hiding, a lot of the things that make cats happy. Again, it's about control and safety in their environment. And we always talk about them as predators, but we have to also recognize that they're prey animals. And so they have reason to be cautious and nervous in open spaces, and they have reasons to want to be up high and be able to see what's going on. And so I think so much of like answering the question of does your cat love you is really just, am I providing an environment that makes my cat as happy as possible? And if you're doing that, then your cat is probably happy and your cat probably appreciates it. So again, thinking back to the dog example I was talking about earlier, is like we've selected dogs to make these facial expressions that remind us of us. And cats don't have those facial muscles, so they don't smile at us. And a lot of people have difficulty reading their cats because of that. And that's where I think this question stems from, is like they just feel like they look at their cat and there's a blank slate. And people start feeling anxiety about that. And I mean, sure enough, I think even we're adjusting to hanging out with people who are wearing face masks, right? We have facial coverings on now because of the coronavirus. And now we're getting less information. So when people look at their cats, they don't get as much information as they might if they looked at a dog. And honestly, is the information from the dog accurate? I don't know. The dog is smiling at me of an expression that I recognize as a smile. Does that mean the dog is happy? I don't know. So anyway, long story short, I think that the fewer expressions that cats can make really makes people uncertain. And so, and it's interesting because this question comes up all the time. So people obviously are very plagued by this. And like I said, I think there's really, really easy ways that you can make your cat's life fantastic. And then you don't have to really stress about whether or not they love you, because you're providing a great environment for your cat. You have lots of scratching options for them. You have lots of climbing options for them. You have clean litter boxes. You have safe spaces for them to escape to. You have playtime with them. Maybe you provide them with safe outdoor access on a harness. There's so many things you can do to make your cat's life really exciting. And then you will see your cat happy. And then I feel like you will then know, yes, your cat loves you and what you're providing for them.
Brilliant. Thank you. I've got so many questions, but I think we'll go on to the next bit of the thing. So I always ask every scientist that I interview about what their experience has been being a woman in science. So I was curious to know how if how did you experience academia? If you were talking to somebody who wanted to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you give them?
Sure. I think so. As I mentioned before, I was a re-entry student. So by the time I was in grad school, I was in my late 30s, and I had been working in several, jobs, normal jobs, non-academic jobs. And, I also was really invested in the punk scene from when I was a teenager. And that's really where I started learning about feminism and also just the ability to take ownership of community activities and be a leader in your community. And so I feel like by the time I got to academia, I was definitely, I would say, interested in having a female advisor. I wasn't wed to that idea, but I was definitely more interested in having an advisor who would also maybe have a better understanding of what that experience was like. And, I'll also say there were other things about being in science that affected me a little bit more because, like, my parents were not academics. Like, they didn't go to college when I was young. My mom went back to college, much later in life. So she was definitely an inspiration for me. But, that was not the environment I grew up in. And so when I got to grad school, I definitely felt like, whoa, I do not belong here because, pretty much most of my cohort, they all went to very, fancy schools and all their parents were professors. And so I was definitely like, oh my God, they made a huge mistake accepting me into this program. And, I'm sure people have talked about imposter syndrome. And, definitely like when I was getting ready for my qualifying exams, there was a lot of anxiety and tears happening. So I definitely struggled and some of it, probably did have to do with my gender. Although, I was in a psychology program. And so those do tend to be pretty female dominated. But, the professors were not dominated by women. So, but I will say just being, I think older and having a lot of like life experience helped me be more confident about being a woman in science. And I also was always interested in opportunities to mentor other women, other first-gen students, other underrepresented minorities. As a grad student, I did mentor a lot of students. I needed a lot of help with my squirrel research because it was pretty intensive. I was studying wild squirrels, so we were outside all the time. And so I needed a lot of assistance to help get that work done. And so I was always looking for opportunities to mentor women who are interested in animal behavior. And more recently, I've been part of a program that is aimed at women in academia who study animal behavior. And we have like a peer network where we have a meeting every other week where we can just talk about our experiences and our problems, what's going well, what we need advice on. And so those, I'd say probably the most important thing, and this has definitely been echoed by my experiences, say on Twitter as a scientist, is really, it's about networking and peer support and lifting each other up, and also recognizing that, well, first of all, academia is a tough place to be in. There's not enough jobs for all of us. And so we also have to keep our eyes on other opportunities, including things like science communication, because a lot of us are not going to get jobs as professors. I'm definitely starting to think that that is true for me. So thinking about other career opportunities. And but I think especially as women, we have to be supportive. And like I said, this peer group that I'm part of has been a really positive experience for me to share that space with other women and talk about what it's like being in science as women. So yeah.
Very cool. I think this peer support group sounds really, really, really interesting, and actually probably something that people should start setting up in different fields if they think that this is something that's going to help. Because I did my PhD a long time ago, and I definitely did not have a peer support group. There was no Twitter at the time, and I wish there had been, because I went through some experiences of my own. So that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for your time. This has been so interesting for me, and I'm sure it's been really interesting to our readers, to our listeners as well.
So nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.